Lieutenant Cole Bennett had been stationed at this base for 2 years, and in that time he'd developed a pretty reliable eye for who belonged in a fighter pilot briefing and who didn't. So when a woman walked in wearing a sun-bleached flight suit, sand still crusted along the seams, hair pulled back in a rough knot, dropping into a chair near the back without a word to anyone, his instincts told him immediately she'd wandered into the wrong room. "Hey, this room's reserved for the F-35 squadron briefing," he said, loud enough for the table to hear. "You might be looking for logistics, down the hall." A couple of the guys around him chuckled. She didn't even look up from the folder she was reading. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said quietly. "No offense," he pressed, grinning at his buddies now, "but you look like you just walked out of the desert. This isn't exactly a room for tourists." She finally looked up at him, calm, unbothered, and said nothing. That's when the squadron commander walked in, glanced at the seating chart, and called out a name that made every single pilot at that table freeze mid-laugh. "Glad you could make it, Nightfox. Let's get started." Every man at that table stood up at once and saluted. Cole Bennett felt his stomach hit the floor. Stick around, because what happens over the next 20 minutes of this story is one of the most satisfying reversals we've ever told on this channel. And if you love watching a room full of confident assumptions collapse all at once, hit subscribe right now, because we post a new story exactly like this one every single week. Major Renee Castillo hadn't slept properly in 3 days. She'd spent the last 72 hours on the ground in a classified desert exercise most of the men in that briefing room had never heard about and would never be cleared to ask about. Coordinating close air support for a joint special operations unit under conditions that had gone sideways more than once. She'd flown out just hours earlier, landed on almost no sleep, and driven straight to the base for a briefing she genuinely couldn't afford to miss. Her call sign, Nightfox, had followed her since a mission 7 years earlier, an operation so quietly and precisely executed that the enemy never realized an aircraft had been in their airspace at all until the aftermath made it impossible to deny. Among pilots who actually knew the details, the name carried a weight that had nothing to do with theatrics and everything to do with results. She never advertised it. She'd learned a long time ago that the people who needed to know who she was already knew, and the people who didn't weren't owed an explanation just because they'd made an assumption. Today, exhausted, dusty, and running on fumes, she wasn't in the mood to correct anyone. She figured the truth would surface on its own soon enough. It did, just not the way Cole Bennett was hoping. Cole Bennett wasn't a cruel person. He was young, confident, a little too comfortable being the loudest voice in a room full of people who usually laughed along with him. That confidence had rarely been tested by anyone who didn't immediately correct him. "Seriously, though," he continued, glancing at his friends for approval, "you sure you're not lost? This is kind of a big day for us. Joint briefing with command. Probably not the best time to wander in." "I'm not wandering," Renee said simply, still reading her folder. "You got orders or something?" he pressed, half joking, half genuinely curious now. "I do." "Mind if I see them?" She finally set the folder down and looked at him directly. "You could just wait 5 minutes and find out, Lieutenant. Or you could keep talking. Your choice." A couple of the pilots near him exchanged uneasy looks, sensing he'd pushed further than the room was comfortable with, but nobody stepped in to stop him. "Look, I'm just saying," Cole continued, unable to resist one more comment. "This room's for people flying 5th-generation fighters, not—" The door opened before he could finish the sentence. Squadron Commander Colonel James Whitlock walked in, glanced down at his tablet, scanned the room, and stopped when his eyes landed on Renee. "Glad you could make it, Nightfox. We weren't sure you'd land in time." Every single pilot at that table rose to their feet and saluted, the sound of chairs scraping back almost in unison. Cole Bennett was still sitting. If you love watching the exact second someone's confidence completely collapses, you're going to enjoy the rest of this story even more. But first, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because this channel is full of moments exactly like this one. For a long moment, Cole didn't move at all, still processing what he'd just heard. Every pilot in that squadron had heard the name Nightfox before, whispered in briefings about missions too classified to detail, referenced in training materials without a face attached to it. Nobody in that room had ever actually met her. Now, apparently, several of them realized they'd already spent the last 3 minutes insulting her. "You're—" he started, scrambling to his feet, saluting a half-second late. "You're Nightfox?" "Major Renee Castillo," she said, closing her folder. "Nightfox works too." "Ma'am, I had no idea. I was just making comments about tourists," she finished for him, not unkindly. "I heard." The room had gone completely silent, several pilots suddenly finding their tablets extremely interesting. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You don't need to apologize for not recognizing me," she said. "I walked in looking like I'd been dragged through a sandstorm, because I had been. That's not what bothers me." "Then what does?" She considered the question, tired but not unkind. "The part where you decided, the second you saw a woman covered in dust with no patches showing, that she must be in the wrong room. You didn't ask who I was, Lieutenant. You just assumed I wasn't worth taking seriously enough to ask." Cole had no response to that. "I've spent the last 3 days coordinating close air support in conditions most of the people in this room will only ever read about in a debrief," she continued. "But that's honestly not the real issue. The real issue is you'd have made the exact same comments to any exhausted-looking woman who walked through that door without an obvious rank display. That's the part actually worth sitting with." The briefing itself ran long, dense with details from the joint exercise Renee had just returned from, details that made it very clear, to everyone in that room, exactly how much authority and experience she carried into it. She didn't single Cole out during the session. She didn't need to. The entire squadron had already watched the moment unfold in real time, and the story of Lieutenant Bennett calling Nightfox a tourist had already started circulating by the time the briefing ended. Afterward, Cole approached her privately, this time without an audience to perform for. "Major Castillo, I need to apologize properly, not the panicked version from earlier." "Go ahead." "I judged you based on how tired and dusty you looked, and decided that meant you didn't belong in a room full of people flying advanced aircraft. That's not the officer I want to be." She studied him for a moment, exhaustion still evident on her face, but her attention fully present. "That's a more honest answer than most people manage, Lieutenant." "I've been flying for 4 years, he said. "I think I started assuming I could size someone up in 5 seconds just by how put together they looked walking through a door. You just proved exactly how wrong that instinct is." "It's wrong more often than people like to admit," she said. "Sometimes it costs nothing. Sometimes it costs you mocking someone who just spent 3 sleepless days keeping ground teams alive." "Understood, ma'am. It won't happen again." "Make sure it doesn't," she said. "Not because of who I turned out to be. Because of who the next tired, dusty person walking through that door might be." In the weeks that followed, something in Cole Bennett noticeably shifted. He didn't transform overnight. That isn't how real change happens. And Renee wasn't interested in a performance of guilt. But the younger pilots in his squadron started noticing small things. He stopped commenting on how people looked when they walked into a room. He started asking questions before deciding who deserved his attention. 2 months later, during a joint training rotation, an unassuming woman in a plain flight suit sat quietly near the back of another briefing, saying nothing, taking notes. The old version of Cole might have made a comment. This version simply introduced himself, asked her name, and treated her exactly like every other pilot in the room, right up until the mission debrief revealed she'd flown more combat hours than anyone else at that table, including him. He didn't need a call sign to remind him twice. Renee Castillo never brought up the incident again in any official capacity. She didn't need to. The story had already made its way through every squadron on base, retold with a mix of embarrassment and quiet respect. The one about the lieutenant who mocked a desert-worn woman pilot, right up until the commander said her name, and every F-35 pilot in the room stood and saluted. Here's a question for you. If you were sitting at that table and heard the commander call her Nightfox after watching Cole mock her for calling her a tourist, would you have laughed along with the room earlier? Or would you have been the one person who paused and asked who she actually was first? Tell me your honest answer in the comments below. I want to know if you think you'd have caught it before the salute did. If this story kept you hooked the way it did while I was writing it, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we post a brand new story just like this one every single week. Stories about the quiet people who turn out to be the most respected person in the room. Tap the notification bell too, so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching all the way through. I'll see you in the next story.